The polished oak doors of the arbitrator's office swung open, and every head turned. It wasn't just Lillian Westwood entering, it was a revelation. 5 months pregnant, radiant in a sapphire dress that scorned mourning, she was the ghost of the woman her husband, the formidable titan of industry Alaric Vaughn, thought he knew. He'd orchestrated this day, the final act of their soulless marriage. But as she met his gaze, not with tears, but with a serene, knowing smile, a cold dread, more potent than any market crash, seized him. He was about to sign away his empire's future, his heart's true north, and he didn't even know it. The truth had just walked in, and it was a masterpiece of deception he had unwittingly co-authored. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was as thin and cold as the marble beneath Lillian Westwood's bare feet. For 3 years, this had been her home, a gilded cage on the 80th floor of the Vaughn Tower, the very pinnacle of Alaric Vaughn's real estate empire. From this vantage point, all of New York City seemed to bow before him, a sprawling kingdom of steel and glass. To the world, she was Mrs. Vaughn, the enviable wife of a self-made billionaire, a man whose ambition was as legendary as his fortune. They were the city's golden couple, their faces gracing the covers of Forbes and Vogue with equal, infuriating ease. But the reality of their marriage was a carefully curated illusion, a business merger of two powerful families disguised as a love story. Her father, the old money patriarch Charles Westwood, had seen the union as a strategic alliance, a way to inject new, ruthless blood into their fading dynasty. Alaric, the boy from the wrong side of the tracks, who had clawed his way to the top, saw the marriage as the final acquisition, the ultimate symbol of his arrival. Lillian had simply been part of the deal. She had tried. In the beginning, she had genuinely attempted to find the man behind the myth. She saw glimpses of him in the late hours, when the armor of the ruthless CEO was set aside, and the exhaustion of his relentless drive was etched on his face. She saw a flicker of warmth when he spoke of his late mother, the one person who had believed in him. But those moments were fleeting, islands in a vast ocean of ambition. His life was a series of transactions, and she, his most prized possession, was often treated as such, admired, polished, and securely locked away. Their conversations were press releases, their dinners were networking events, and their bed, a lonely, cold expanse of high thread count sheets. He was married to his work, to the thrill of the deal, to the relentless pursuit of more. And in his world of black and white, of profit and loss, Lillian, with her love for art, her quiet moments with a book, and her yearning for genuine connection, was a variable he couldn't quantify. The discovery of her pregnancy had been a silent, solitary one. 2 blue lines on a plastic stick in the cavernous, white marble bathroom. It should have been a moment of shared joy, of whispered excitement. Instead, it was a secret she held close, a tiny, fluttering life that was hers and hers alone. How could she tell a man who scheduled intimacy in his calendar? A man who had once, during a rare moment of brutal honesty, confessed that he saw children as a distraction, a dilution of his focus. She had imagined the conversation 100 times. Him, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, his eyes the color of a stormy sea, scanning a stock market ticker on one of his many screens. She would tell him, and he would likely see it as another strategic move, a Vaughn heir. Good for the brand, for the legacy. He would plan the child's life as meticulously as he planned a hostile takeover. The best schools, the right connections, a future forged in the crucible of his own ambition. But would he ever truly see the child? Would he ever hold them not as an heir, but as his son or daughter? The thought was suffocating. This child, her child, deserved more than to be a footnote in the biography of Alaric Vaughn. They deserved to be loved for who they were, not what they represented. And Lillian, after 3 years of suffocating in the rarefied air of the Vaughn Empire, deserved to breathe again. The catalyst for the end had been a conversation she overheard. Alaric was on the phone in his study, the door slightly ajar. His voice was different when he spoke to his sister, Amelia, the one person who seemed to get past his defenses. "I don't know, Amy," he'd said, his voice laced with a weariness Lillian rarely heard. "It's fine. The company is thriving. We're closing the Sinclair deal next month. Lillian is, well, she's Lillian. She does what's expected. It's a stable arrangement. A stable arrangement. That was their marriage, a line item on a balance sheet. The words had been a slap in the face, a cold, hard confirmation of what she had long suspected. She was a fixture, a part of the decor, as essential and as soulless as the multi-million-dollar Picasso that hung in their foyer. That night, she had made her decision. She would leave him, but she would do it on her own terms. She wouldn't be the spurned wife, the tragic figure begging for scraps from his table. She would be the architect of her own liberation, and she would protect the one thing that was truly hers. The divorce proceedings had been initiated by her, a move that had clearly blindsided Alaric. He, the master strategist, had been outmaneuvered. His initial reaction had been a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. Divorce was messy, bad for the brand. He had tried to placate her, offering her a more generous allowance, a new sports car, a private yacht. He had treated the dissolution of their marriage like any other negotiation, assuming that everyone had a price. He couldn't fathom that what she wanted wasn't something he could buy. She wanted freedom. She wanted a life where her worth wasn't tied to the Vaughn name. She had refused his offers, her lawyers communicating her simple, non-negotiable terms. A clean break, a dissolution of all ties, and only what she was legally entitled to under their prenuptial agreement. An agreement that had been heavily skewed in his favor. She had signed it without a second thought 3 years ago. A naive girl in love with a fantasy. Now it was her shield. She didn't want his money, not a single dime of the fortune built on a foundation of loveless transactions. She wanted to erase him from her life. This had infuriated him. His ego, as vast and as fragile as his empire, was bruised. He couldn't comprehend why she would walk away from such immense wealth. His lawyers, led by the notoriously aggressive shark, Marcus Thorne, had hinted that she must have a lover, that she was planning to extort him later. They had dug into her life, searching for any scrap of dirt, any leverage they could use against her. They found nothing. Lillian's life had been an open book, albeit a very lonely one. The final meeting, the one to sign the divorce papers, was set for a Tuesday in May. And it was for this day that Lillian had been preparing. For weeks, she had been quietly moving her personal belongings out of the penthouse, storing them in a modest 2-bedroom apartment she had rented under her mother's maiden name, Dupont, in a quiet, tree-lined street in the West Village. She had started seeing a new obstetrician, Dr. Anya Sharma, a woman whose warmth and kindness were a balm to her frayed nerves. She had also started to invest in herself. Not with Alaric's money, but with a small inheritance from her grandmother that she had carefully guarded. She had started taking business classes online, learning about sustainable investments, about companies that valued people over profit. She was building a new life, brick by brick, far from the cold shadow of Vaughn Tower. The day of the divorce, she woke before the sun had cast its first golden rays over the city. She had spent the night in her new apartment, the sounds of the city a comforting lullaby. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, of ownership over her own life. She chose her outfit with the precision of a general preparing for battle. The sapphire blue dress was a conscious choice. It was the color of the ocean, vast and deep and free. It was also the color of the sapphire necklace Alaric had given her on their first anniversary, a piece she had left behind in the penthouse jewelry box. The dress was tailored to perfection, clinging to her curves in a way that didn't hide, but celebrated her pregnancy. It was a statement. This is who I am now. This is what you are losing. She did her own makeup, a natural, radiant look that highlighted the glow of her pregnancy. Her long, dark hair was styled in soft waves that cascaded over her shoulders. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw not the timid, overshadowed wife of a billionaire, but a woman in her own right, a mother-to-be, a force to be reckoned with. Her lawyer, a shrewd, compassionate woman named Eleanor Vance, who had been a friend of her mother's, met her in the lobby of the arbitrator's building. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly as she took in Lillian's appearance. "You look," Eleanor began, searching for the right word. "Ready," Lillian finished for her, a small, confident smile playing on her lips. As they rode the elevator up to the 40th floor, Lillian's heart beat a steady rhythm. There was no fear, no regret, only a quiet determination. She was not here to fight, to scream, to cry. She was here to close a chapter, to sign a piece of paper that would set her free. Alaric would be there, flanked by his legal team. He would be impeccably dressed in one of his custom-made Tom Ford suits, his face a mask of cool indifference. He would expect her to be a mirror of himself, cold and professional. Or perhaps he expected tears, a last-ditch, emotional plea. He was a man who saw the world in predictable patterns, who believed he could anticipate every move. But today, Lillian was a variable he had not accounted for. She was a living, breathing testament to a truth he had been too blind, too arrogant, too consumed by his own ambition to see. The truth that the greatest asset he ever possessed was not a skyscraper or a stock portfolio, but the woman who was about to walk out of his life forever, carrying with her a secret that would have redefined his entire empire. The elevator doors opened and Lillian took a deep breath. It was time. Time to face the man she had once loved, the man who had almost broken her, and show him exactly what he had lost. The long walk down the marble hallway felt like a final catwalk, each step a definitive move away from the past and towards an unknown but hopeful future. The conference room was a theater of power. A long, intimidatingly polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of men in expensive suits. At the head of this table sat Alaric Vaughn, an undisputed king in his court of law. He was flanked by Marcus Thorne, a lawyer whose reputation for ruthlessness was so pronounced it was practically a brand. On the other side sat his CFO, a man with a perpetually worried expression, clutching a portfolio of documents as if it were a life raft. Alaric's eyes were fixed on the double doors, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The delay was uncharacteristic of Lillian. Punctuality was a virtue he demanded from everyone, a sign of respect he felt was his due. Her tardiness was a minor crack in the controlled facade of the day, and it irked him. He glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, a subtle, impatient tap of his finger on the table's surface. He wanted this over. He had a multi-billion-dollar merger to finalize, a deal that would make his previous accomplishments look like child's play. This divorce was a tedious, unwelcome distraction. And then the doors opened. The moment Lillian entered, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out, replaced by a stunned silence. Alaric's head snapped up, and his carefully constructed composure shattered. He had been expecting a pale, subdued Lillian, the woman he had last seen weeks ago, her eyes shadowed with a sadness he had chosen to ignore. He had been prepared for a somber, businesslike transaction. He was not prepared for this. She was a vision. The sapphire dress was a bold, defiant statement against the somber grays and blacks of the room. It clung to a figure that was undeniably, beautifully pregnant. Her belly, a gentle, perfect curve, was the focal point of her entire being. Her face, which he had last remembered as drawn and tired, was now radiant, glowing with a vitality that seemed to mock the sterile environment of the room. Her eyes, clear and direct, held no trace of the heartbroken woman he had expected. Instead, they held a serene strength, an unreadable calm that he found more unsettling than any emotional outburst. Alaric felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation in his chest. It was as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him. Pregnant. Lillian was pregnant. The thought ricocheted around his mind, a chaotic, disorienting force. He did a quick, frantic calculation. 5 months, maybe 6. He mentally backtracked, trying to pinpoint a time, a moment. Their last few months together had been a blur of business trips, late nights at the office, and a growing, unspoken distance between them. There had been moments of intimacy, but they had been perfunctory, scheduled. He had never once considered the possibility of a child. It hadn't been in his 5-year plan. A wave of cold fury washed over him, chasing away the initial shock. She had hidden this from him. She had deliberately kept this monumental, life-altering secret from him. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a betrayal of the highest order. He saw it instantly, through the lens of his suspicious mind. This was a scheme, a classic gold digger move. She had gotten pregnant to trap him, to secure a bigger settlement, to lay claim to a larger piece of his empire. The timing was too perfect, her appearance too calculated. Marcus Thorne, ever the opportunist, leaned in, whispering in Alaric's ear. "This is a play, Alaric. A blatant, last-minute power play. Don't let her get to you. We stick to the plan." Alaric nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing into icy slits. He forced his features back into a mask of indifference, but inside, a storm was raging. He felt a primal sense of ownership, of outrage. A Vaughn heir, his heir, and she was using their child as a pawn in this sordid game. Lillian walked gracefully to her side of the table, her lawyer, Eleanor Vance, pulling out her chair. She didn't spare Alaric another glance, her focus entirely on her own legal counsel. This deliberate dismissal, this utter lack of acknowledgement, stoked the flames of his anger even higher. He was Alaric Vaughn. People didn't dismiss him. "Lillian," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I see you've come with a surprise." She finally turned her head, her expression one of mild curiosity, as if he were a stranger making a vaguely interesting comment. "Alaric," she replied, her voice smooth and even, betraying no emotion. "I'm here to sign the papers, as we agreed." "We agreed to a divorce based on a set of facts," Marcus Thorne interjected, his voice sharp and accusatory. "A significant fact seems to have been deliberately withheld from us, the existence of a situation." He gestured vaguely towards her belly, his distaste evident. Eleanor Vance, a seasoned lawyer who had seen her fair share of corporate bullies, did not flinch. "My client's pregnancy is her own personal matter. It has no bearing on the terms of the prenuptial agreement, which you, Mr. Thorne, drafted so meticulously. The agreement stands. We are here to finalize the dissolution of the marriage, not to renegotiate." "The hell it doesn't!" Alaric exploded, his voice echoing in the silent room. He stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the table. "That is my child!" Lillian finally met his furious gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It wasn't fear, but something akin to pity. "Is it, Alaric?" she asked softly, her question a quiet, devastating blow. "Were you a part of its creation in any meaningful way? Did you share in the hope, the fear, the morning sickness? Do you even know the due date?" "This child," she said, her hand moving to rest protectively on her belly, "is not a Vaughn asset. They are not a clause in a contract. They are a human being, and I will not have them raised in a boardroom." The accusation hit him harder than any physical blow. A Vaughn asset. It was as if she had reached into his mind and plucked out his own initial shameful thought. He saw a flash of himself in her words, a cold, calculating man who valued legacy over love, and he hated it. He hated her for seeing it, for saying it. "This is ridiculous," Marcus Thorne scoffed, shuffling his papers. "We will be contesting this. We will demand a paternity test. We will file for full custody." Eleanor Vance laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension. "On what grounds? That he's the richer parent? That he can provide a life of empty luxury and emotional neglect? You'll be laughed out of court, Marcus. Alaric's own deposition, taken 2 months ago, will see to that." Alaric's blood ran cold. The deposition. He had been arrogant, dismissive. He had painted a picture of their marriage as a functional, passionless arrangement. He had stated under oath that he had no desire for children, that he considered them a hindrance to his career. He had, in his own words, built a cage for himself, and Eleanor Vance was about to lock the door. He looked at Lillian, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he saw past the beautiful wife, the society figure. He saw a woman of formidable strength, a woman who had planned this with the strategic genius he usually reserved for himself. She had known what he would do, how he would react. She had anticipated his every move. She had used his own arrogance, his own emotional blindness as a weapon against him. The calm, serene woman who had walked into the room was a warrior. She had come prepared for battle, armed with a truth he couldn't deny and a future he had no part in. "Let's get on with it, shall we?" Lillian said, her voice pulling him back to the present. She reached for the pen on the table, her hand steady. "I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon." The casual mention of a life that was now completely separate from his was another calculated cut. He watched, speechless, as she signed the divorce papers with a flourish, her signature a bold, elegant script. She pushed the documents across the table. Alaric stared at the papers, at the line waiting for his own signature. Everything in him screamed against it. Signing those papers meant accepting this new reality. It meant admitting defeat. It meant letting her walk away, not just from their marriage, but with his child, a child he hadn't even known existed an hour ago. But what choice did he have? Eleanor Vance was right. His own words, his own actions, had sealed his fate. Any legal battle would be a public relations nightmare, a bloody, protracted war that would expose the hollow truth of his perfect life. He, the master of the game, had been checkmated. With a hand that felt strangely heavy, he picked up the pen. The room was silent, the only sound the frantic beating of his own heart. He looked at Lillian one last time. Her face was calm, her gaze directed out the window at the city skyline, as if she were already moving on. He realized with a sickening jolt that this wasn't just about the divorce or the baby. This was about something more, something he had missed entirely. There was a piece of the puzzle, a crucial detail that was still hidden from him. Her transformation, her confidence, her meticulous planning, it all pointed to a larger, more complex truth. He signed the papers. His signature, usually a bold, assertive scrawl, was a hesitant, almost illegible mark. It was the signature of a man who had just lost a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. As Lillian stood up to leave, her lawyer gathering their belongings, Alaric spoke, his voice hoarse. "Why, Lillian? Why hide it?" She paused at the door, turning to face him. A sad, enigmatic smile touched her lips. "You were never looking, Alaric," she said softly. "You see acquisitions, you see assets, you see everything you want to possess, but you never truly see what you have." And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a shattered billionaire and the deafening silence of a truth he was only just beginning to comprehend. The real drama, he was starting to realize, had only just begun. The beautiful woman who had just divorced him was not the woman he had married, and the truth he suspected was far more devastating than he could possibly imagine. The days following the divorce were a disorienting blur for Alaric Vaughn. He threw himself into his work with a renewed, almost manic intensity, orchestrating the Sinclair merger with his trademark ruthlessness. He worked punishing hours, fueled by caffeine and a simmering rage. He was determined to prove that he was unaffected, that the departure of his wife and the revelation of his unborn child were mere footnotes in the grand narrative of his success. But the silence of the penthouse was a constant, mocking reminder of his loss. The vast empty spaces that had once symbolized his power now felt like a mausoleum. Every room held a ghost of Lillian. He saw her curled up on the sofa with a book, her favorite cashmere throw draped over her legs. He heard the faint echo of her laughter in the hallway, a sound he now realized he had rarely elicited. He found a single forgotten earring on her nightstand, a delicate pearl that seemed to scream of a life, a softness he had bulldozed over. His nights were sleepless, plagued by a recurring image. Lillian, radiant in her sapphire dress, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, her eyes filled with a pity that was more cutting than any hatred. Her final words echoed in his mind. "You never truly see what you have." He had seen her as an accessory, a beautiful, well-mannered addition to his life. He had valued her for her pedigree, for the way she looked on his arm at Gallus, for the serene, aristocratic calm she brought to his chaotic world. He had never once considered what she wanted, what she felt. He had assumed that the wealth and the status he provided were enough. It was the ultimate arrogant miscalculation. His sister, Amelia, was the only one who dared to break through his self-imposed isolation. She arrived at the penthouse one evening, unannounced, carrying a bottle of scotch and a look of profound concern. Amelia was a pediatric surgeon, a woman whose life was dedicated to healing, and she had always seen through Alaric's carefully constructed armor. "She played you, Alaric," he grumbled, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. She waited until the last minute to reveal the pregnancy to gain the upper hand. Amelia took a slow sip, her intelligent eyes studying him over the rim of her glass. Did she? She asked quietly. Or did she protect her child from a man who once told her that a baby would be a strategic liability? Alaric flinched. He had forgotten saying that. It had been early in their marriage, during a hypothetical conversation about the future. To him, it had been a pragmatic statement. To her, he now realized it must have been a death knell for any hope of a real family. She didn't ask for a single penny more than the prenup, Amelia continued, her voice gentle but firm. She didn't use the baby as leverage for money. Think about it, Alaric. What did she gain by revealing it that day? Not wealth, not a better settlement. What she gained was her freedom with her child on her own terms. She took away your power to control the narrative. She knew you'd try to take the child, to control its life, to make it another Vaughn acquisition. She outmaneuvered you, not to hurt you, but to protect her baby. Amelia's words were a slow-acting poison, seeping into the cracks of his certainty. He had been so blinded by his own ego, so convinced of his own victimhood, that he hadn't considered Lillian's motives from any other perspective but his own. The first real seed of doubt was planted by a man named Richard Finch. Finch was a private investigator, a discreet and highly effective operator Alaric had used in the past for corporate espionage. Against his better judgment, consumed by a need for answers, Alaric had hired Finch to find out everything he could about Lillian's new life. He had told himself it was about the child, about ensuring its well-being, but deep down, he knew it was about his own wounded pride. He needed to understand how he had been so thoroughly defeated. Finch's first report was mundane. Lillian was living in a modest apartment in the West Village. She was taking online business courses. She was regularly visiting a doctor, Anya Sharma, for her prenatal care. Finch had provided the address of the clinic. On a whim, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, Alaric found himself parked across the street from the clinic one sunny afternoon. He watched as Lillian came out, shielding her eyes from the sun. She was wearing a simple sundress, her baby bump more pronounced now. She looked happy. There was a lightness to her step, a genuine smile on her face as she spoke on the phone. And then he saw who she was meeting. A man was waiting for her at a nearby cafe. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He stood up as she approached, his hand gently touching the small of her back as he led her to a table. They sat down, their conversation animated, their laughter easy and natural. A white-hot jealousy, so intense it almost made him physically sick, surged through Alaric. So this was it. This was the truth. There was another man. His lawyers had been right all along. She had left him for someone else. This man, this nobody, was the reason for her newfound radiance, her quiet confidence. He barked an order into his phone to Finch. Find out who he is. I want to know everything about him. The next day, Finch's report landed in his inbox. The man's name was Dr. Ethan Miller. He was a pediatrician, specializing in neonatal care. He was also a widower, his wife having passed away 2 years prior from cancer. He had no children. He was a co-founder of a nonprofit organization that provided medical care to underprivileged children in developing countries. He and Lillian had been seen together several times, usually near the clinic or in the park. A pediatrician, a do-gooder. The profile was so wholesome, so antithetical to his own life, that it felt like a deliberate insult. He imagined Lillian, drawn to Ethan's quiet kindness, his selfless dedication to helping others. It was everything he wasn't. But as he stared at the report, a detail snagged his attention. Dr. Anya Sharma, Lillian's obstetrician, was on the board of Dr. Ethan Miller's nonprofit. They were colleagues, friends. It was possible their meeting was innocent, but the easy intimacy he had witnessed suggested something more. The real bombshell, however, came from an unexpected source. His own CFO, the perpetually worried David Chen, requested an urgent meeting. David came into his office, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he held a file. Alaric, he began, his voice barely a whisper. I think I've found something you need to see. It's about Westwood Industries. Westwood Industries was Lillian's family company. It was old, respectable, but had been struggling for years. a lumbering giant in a fast-paced world. Alaric had never paid it much attention, other than as the source of his wife's pedigree. "What about it?" Alaric asked, impatient. "They've been quietly liquidating assets for the past 6 months," David said, opening the file. "Small properties, minor holdings. It's been done very discreetly through a series of shell corporations. But the money isn't being reinvested into the company. It's being funneled into a private trust." He slid a document across the desk. "This trust was set up 8 months ago. The beneficiary is a single entity, a nonprofit organization." Alaric picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. And then he saw the name of the nonprofit, and the world tilted on its axis. It was Dr. Ethan Miller's organization. He stared at the name, his mind racing, trying to connect the dots. Lillian's family, the Westwoods, were secretly funneling millions of dollars into a trust for the benefit of a nonprofit run by a pediatrician Lillian was now spending time with. And then David Chen delivered the final, devastating blow. "There's more," he said, his voice grim. "I looked into the historical financials of Westwood Industries. For the past decade, they've been paying a significant retainer to a private medical research facility. The payments stopped abruptly about 3 years ago." 3 years ago, Alaric repeated, his voice hollow. "That was when he and Lillian had married." "Yes," David confirmed. "The facility specializes in experimental gene therapies. I dug a little deeper. I found the name of the head researcher on the project Westwood Industries was funding. It was Dr. Alistair Vaughn." The name hit Alaric like a physical blow. Dr. Alistair Vaughn, his uncle. A brilliant, disgraced geneticist who had been ostracized from the scientific community years ago for his controversial, unsanctioned research. Alaric's own father had disowned him. Alaric hadn't seen or spoken to his uncle in over 20 years. "What was my uncle researching?" Alaric asked, dread coiling in his stomach. David hesitated. "He was working on a cure for a rare hereditary neurological disorder, a degenerative condition that manifests in early childhood. It's called Vaughn's disease." The room began to spin. Vaughn's disease. The dark secret of his family. A genetic curse that had claimed the life of his younger brother when he was just a boy. A disease that was passed down through the male line of the Vaughn family. A disease that he, Alaric Vaughn, was a carrier of. He had told Lillian about his brother, of course. In one of their rare moments of vulnerability, he had confessed the story of his family's tragedy, but he had never told her the full truth. He had never told her that he carried the gene, that there was a 50% chance any son of his would inherit the fatal illness. It was a truth he had buried deep, a risk he had chosen to ignore. It was not part of the perfect, powerful image he projected to the world, and now all the pieces fell into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. Lillian hadn't been having an affair. She hadn't been planning a gold digger scheme. She had discovered the truth. His truth, the one he had so carefully concealed. She must have found out about his uncle's research, about the funding from her own family. She must have realized why her family had stopped the funding 3 years ago, when she married him. Her father, Charles Westwood, must have known about Vaughn's disease. The marriage wasn't just a strategic alliance. It was a desperate, cynical gamble. They were hoping that Alaric's uncle, funded by their money, could find a cure before the possibility of a Vaughn heir ever became a reality. And Lillian, trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who carried a genetic death sentence, had made a choice. The online business courses, the interest in sustainable investments. It wasn't just about building a new life. It was about her family's money. She was trying to salvage what was left of her family's fortune, to redirect it from a failed, desperate gamble on a cure to something positive, something that could actually do some good in the world, like Ethan Miller's nonprofit. Her pregnancy wasn't a weapon against him. It was a race against time. He thought of her serene smile on the day of the divorce, her quiet confidence. It wasn't the smile of a woman who had won. It was the smile of a woman who had survived. She had navigated a minefield of lies and betrayals, and she had emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but whole. And the baby. His baby. He felt a wave of nausea. He had been so consumed with the idea that she was hiding the baby from him, when the horrifying truth was that she was protecting the baby from him, from his own tainted bloodline. He looked at the picture of Ethan Miller on Finch's report, a pediatrician, a specialist in neonatal care. Of course, it all made perfect sense. She hadn't turned to him for romance. She had turned to him for his expertise, for his help. She was preparing for the worst-case scenario. She was preparing for the possibility that her child, their child, would be born with Vaughn's disease. The weight of his own lies, his own arrogance, his own monumental, unforgivable blindness came crashing down on him. He had called her a gold digger, a traitor. He had accused her of the very things he himself was guilty of: deception, manipulation, putting assets before people. He had been so focused on the empire he was building that he had failed to see the rot at its very foundation. He had lost his wife, his child, and his own soul, not because of a grand betrayal, but because of 1,000 small ones. Because he had never learned to see the truth, even when it was sleeping in the bed next to him. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He walked to the vast floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city he had conquered. It all seemed so small now, so insignificant. He had to find her. He had to talk to her. He didn't know if he could fix it, if he could ever earn her forgiveness. But for the first time in his life, Alaric Vaughn knew he had to try. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a man, as a father, before it was well and truly too late. The truth was out, not just about her, but about him, and it was a truth that would change everything. The address Alaric had for Dr. Anya Sharma's private clinic was in a discreet, upscale medical building in Lenox Hill. It exuded an air of quiet professionalism, a world away from the cutthroat chaos of Wall Street. As he stood across the street, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement, Alaric felt a profound sense of dislocation. He was a man accustomed to being in control, to having gatekeepers and assistants pave his way. Now he was just a man, alone on a sidewalk, about to beg for a meeting he had no right to expect. He had spent the last 24 hours in a state of self-imposed exile in his penthouse, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in his mind, forming a mosaic of his own failings. He had reread the reports, the financial statements, his own deposition. Each word was a fresh indictment. He saw with excruciating clarity how his ambition had been a cancer, metastasizing through his life, destroying everything pure and good it touched. He had treated Lillian's heart like a hostile takeover, and her family's desperation as leverage. His uncle, Alistair. The memory was a phantom limb, an ache from a distant past. He remembered a kind, eccentric man who smelled of pipe tobacco and old books, who had filled his childhood with wonder before being cast out, branded a failure, a disgrace. Alaric's father, a man of brutal pragmatism, had taught him to despise weakness, to sever any ties that could drag him down. Alistair, with his obsessive, underfunded research, had been deemed a liability. Now Alaric understood that his uncle hadn't been a failure. He had been a man trying to save their family from its own tragic legacy. A legacy Alaric had chosen to perpetuate through his own silence. He crossed the street, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He didn't have a plan. For the first time in his adult life, he was operating without a strategy, without a desired outcome he could quantify. He was driven by a single desperate need: to see her, to speak the truth, to offer a confession, if not an apology. The clinic's waiting room was serene, decorated in muted tones of cream and sage green. A soft classical melody played in the background. It was a world designed to soothe, to calm. It was Lillian's world. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Dr. Sharma," Alaric said, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "I don't have an appointment." "I'm sorry, sir, the doctor's schedule is fully booked." "Please," he said, the word raw, stripped of its usual authority. "My name is Alaric Vaughn. It's a matter of extreme personal urgency." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly in recognition of his name. She hesitated, then picked up the phone, her voice a low murmur. After a moment, she hung up. Doctor, Sharma can give you 5 minutes between patients. Please have a seat. The wait was agonizing. He sat on the edge of a plush armchair, his hands clasped between his knees, a caricature of the powerful man he was supposed to be. He was just another anxious person in a doctor's waiting room. Finally, a door opened, and a woman in a white coat emerged. Dr. Anya Sharma was in her late 40s, with intelligent, compassionate eyes that seemed to see right through him. Mr. Vaughn, I'm Dr. Sharma. Please come in. Her office was modest, filled with medical textbooks and pictures of smiling babies. There was a warmth to it that Alaric's own office deliberately lacked. You have 5 minutes, Doctor, Sharma said, her tone professional but not unkind. I'll be honest, I'm only seeing you because Lillian asked me to, should you ever appear. She said you might. The statement floored him. Lillian had anticipated this too. She was always one step ahead. Lillian, how is she? How is the baby? They are both healthy, Doctor, Sharma replied cautiously. Which is, I gather, what you're really here to ask about. Alaric swallowed, the truth a bitter pill. I know about Vaughn's disease, he said, the words tasting like ash. I know that I'm a carrier, and I know that you and Dr. Miller are helping her prepare for the possibility. Dr. Sharma's expression softened with a flicker of sympathy. We've done the amniocentesis. We're just waiting for the results. But yes, we have a comprehensive care plan in place, regardless of the outcome. Lillian has been extraordinarily brave. She's been preparing for every eventuality. She thinks the baby has the disease, Alaric stated, the realization a fresh wave of pain. She's a mother, Doctor, Sharma corrected gently. She's preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. She has spent months researching, speaking to specialists, understanding the condition in a way I suspect you never have. She has been grieving a possibility, a fear, all alone. All alone. The words twisted in his gut. While he had been closing deals and basking in the glory of his empire, she had been carrying this terrifying burden by herself. I need to see her, he pleaded. I need to explain. Explain what, Mr. Vaughn? Dr. Sharma's voice was sharp now, the compassion replaced by a fierce protectiveness. That you hid a genetic condition that could have devastating consequences for your child? That your marriage was based on a lie of omission so profound it's almost unthinkable? That you accused her of betrayal when she was, in fact, the one who was betrayed, not just by you, but by her own family. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing the last vestiges of his self-delusion. Her father knew, Alaric whispered, more to himself than to her. Yes, Doctor, Sharma confirmed. He confessed everything to her after the divorce. He and your father made a deal years ago. Charles Westwood would fund your uncle's research, and in return, your father would approve of a marriage between you and Lillian. It was a grotesque, medieval bargain. They were gambling with her life, with her future children's lives. When you married her, her father cut the funding, assuming the problem was contained. It was worse than he could have ever imagined, a pact between two patriarchs, with Lillian as the sacrificial lamb. Where is she? He asked, his voice cracking. Please, I'm not here to fight or to make demands. I need her to know that I know the truth. All of it. Dr. Sharma studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. She saw the brokenness in his eyes, the genuine soul-crushing remorse. She saw the man stripped bare of his power, his wealth, his ego. She's not in the city, Doctor, Sharma said finally, her voice softening once more. She needed to get away from it all. She's at a small cottage upstate, a place her grandmother left her. It's her sanctuary. She wrote an address on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. I'm probably going to lose a patient and a friend for this, she said with a sigh. But I'm a mother too, and I believe in 11th hour conversions. Don't make me regret this, Mr. Vaughn. Alaric took the paper, his hand shaking. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. The drive upstate was a pilgrimage. He drove himself, the sleek, powerful engine of his Bentley, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his soul. He left the city behind, the skyscrapers shrinking in his rearview mirror, and headed towards the green rolling hills of the Hudson Valley. The address led him to a small, secluded cottage nestled amongst trees, overlooking a serene lake. A plume of smoke curled from the chimney. It was a picture of peace, a world away from the cold, sterile luxury of his penthouse. He parked the car and walked up the gravel path. His heart was hammering against his ribs. What would he say? How could he possibly begin to atone for the damage he had caused? He saw her before she saw him. She was sitting on a porch swing, a thick blanket wrapped around her, a mug cradled in her hands. Her profile was outlined against the setting sun, her baby bump a beautiful, prominent silhouette. She looked peaceful, content. She looked like she belonged here. She must have heard the crunch of gravel under his shoes because she turned her head. Her eyes widened, the peace in them replaced by a complex mixture of surprise, apprehension, and a deep, weary sadness. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps, not daring to come any closer. The gulf between them felt as wide as an ocean. "Lillian," he began, his voice hoarse. I know." She didn't pretend to misunderstand. She simply watched him, her gaze steady, waiting. "I know about Vaughn's disease," he continued, the confession spilling out of him. "I know about my uncle's research and your father's funding. I know about the deal they made. I know that I am a carrier, and I know that I never told you. There is no excuse, no explanation that could ever justify what I did. My silence, my ignorance. It was a choice, a selfish, arrogant, unforgivable choice." He took a ragged breath, the clean country air feeling sharp in his lungs. "I spent the last few weeks thinking you had betrayed me. I saw your pregnancy as a weapon, your radiance as a sign of an affair. I was so blinded by my own ego, my own wounded pride, that I couldn't see the truth that you were the one who was betrayed, the truth that you have been carrying a burden that should have been mine to share." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I saw you with Dr. Miller. I assumed the worst. I know now that you were just trying to be a good mother. You were protecting our child in a way that I was too much of a coward to do." Tears were streaming down his face now, hot and shameful. He didn't bother to wipe them away. "I am so sorry, Lillian, for everything, for the loveless marriage, for the lies, for the fear I put you through. You deserved so much more. Our child deserves so much more." Lillian listened in silence, her expression unreadable. The setting sun cast a golden glow on her face, catching the glint of a single tear that escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear, carrying across the still evening air. "I didn't do it to punish you, Alaric," she said softly. "I did it to survive. I did it because I was drowning, and I had to learn how to swim. Not just for me, but for this baby." She placed a hand on her belly. "I had to create a world for us where we could be safe, a world that wasn't built on secrets and lies." He took a tentative step up onto the porch, his movements slow, cautious, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Is there any hope for us? Not for our marriage. I know I've destroyed that. But for our child? Can I be a father to them?" It was the most important question he had ever asked. The future of his empire, his wealth, his legacy. It all meant nothing compared to her answer. Lillian looked at him, truly looked at him, for a long, searching moment. She saw the broken man before her, stripped of all his pretense. She saw the genuine remorse in his tear-filled eyes. She saw the flicker of the man she had once hoped he could be. And then her phone, which was resting on the swing beside her, buzzed. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the screen. A small, shuddering sigh escaped her lips. "That was Dr. Sharma," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "The results of the amnio are in." Alaric's heart stopped. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of all the lies, all the pain, all the secrets. He held his breath, bracing himself for the verdict that would define the rest of their lives. He had arrived at the 11th hour, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the truth had arrived first, and he was utterly, terrifyingly too late to change it. The silence on that porch stretched into an eternity, thick with the weight of unspoken fears and a future hanging in the balance. Alaric Vaughn, the man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, was powerless, waiting for a single word to define his redemption or his ruin. Lillian's journey from a silenced wife to a radiant, formidable mother had led to this precipice. She had fought for her child's future, a future free from the gilded cage of his lies. Did the results in that message signal a new battle, a life of heartache and struggle? Or did they offer a sliver of grace, a chance for a new beginning, born not from a contract, but from a devastating, world-altering truth? Their story is a raw, unflinching look at the secrets that fester in the shadows of wealth and power. If their journey has moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who loves a story of strength and resilience, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark.